So first of all, good morning and congratulations on this series. It is fantastic. I enjoy watching these series with my nephews. They love them so much. What is it like to write for a series like this?
Well, it is a pretty out of pocket series in the sense that, yes, it's a superhero series, but it also is a series that sort of pokes fun at superhero tropes. And then simultaneously, it's a villain of the week type of show, but then there's also a season arc, and then there's also a cultural element. So I'd say it's like juggling eight balls at the same time.
Wow. Yeah, and above all, it is set in the universe of Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law. Uh, those bo are both very unique shows. This one is also different from those. What how do you begin to write it for a show like this when there's so much that goes into it? There's musical elements, there's story elements, there's the bigger arc of everything. What what does the writers room talk about in order to create these shows that are both for kids and adults?
Well, ultimately, I think that it's important to remember when you're writing for a show like this and for any show, ultimately, it's that even though an episode or a show can seem very complex, at the beginning, everything needs to be simple. So you need to know in every episode whose story this is, what's going to change, what is the inciting incident, what is the climax, right? So I always say that it may seem overwhelming, but writing for a show like this, it might seem like you need to create a Christmas tree from scratch, right? Which we kind of do. But first, what you got to do is create a really good structure for the tree. And then you can add all the psychotic ornaments that you want, but you need a good solid structure. So simplicity first and complexity later is what I always keep in mind.
Definitely, and bringing in the Latin element to it because we in season two we see this telenovela episode, and in season one we had a couple of little tropes of the same thing. What is it like to bring that element into the story?
Well, it was kind of like a non-negotiable in the sense that half of the writers' room is Latino. They chose me to be the head writer for a reason. I'm from Venezuela, and to not mine stories, characters, idiosyncrasies out of that side of me and many of the writers would be a disservice, right? It would be a disservice to story, it would be a disservice to inclusivity, but it would also be a disservice to humor. So for us, it was sort of like, oh, great, we're going to add this added element into this delicious stew we're creating. It isn't the only element. It isn't an element that we're going to be focusing on every episode. But just like Latinos everywhere, our identity isn't what we talk about and what we do and what we like discuss constantly. It's the filter with which we see the world. And so this is how these characters sort of deal with their identity. But we had a lot of fun taking a lot of those idiosyncratic cultural touchstones like La Llorona and we have a character based off my grandma who I think is a little bit stereotypical. So bringing these elements is like so exciting for me. It also felt like and of course. There was never a moment that was like, what if it was like, of course we're going to do this. It's necessary. It's important.
Definitely, and I think the us as Hispanic we make fun of a lot of these stereotypes as well. How do you not push it too far so it's still like a kids show that they can understand that this humor as well?
Well, I'd say that if we're playing with stereotypes, for example, the grandma is based off my grandma who was very into cleaning and very into like la vajilla, which is her, the plates she had for generations given to her by her great grandma and her great grandma, all these things that sort of come from a place of truth. I think as long as something comes from a place of truth and not from a place of ridicule, I think you're pretty much in the safe zone. But then also always keeping in mind that these cultural touchstones and these characters aren't the butt of the joke ever. They are in on the joke, and
Yeah,
the joke is something else. So that's something that we always kept in mind.
definitely. And you also lend your voice to this show. What is it like to take on a character?
It's literally one of my favorite things in the universe because I go about my life speaking in bizarre accents constantly. I'm like always like switching it up, babes, you know what I mean? And like I my whole life I've just been this absolute ADHD ball of energy that loves doing voices and breathing life into characters. And as a writer, I love doing it on the page, but as a performer, it I also just like completely disappearing into a character, which in the booth is a little bit difficult at times because you're alone. It's can get hot. You have people listen, talking to you through the headphones, and it feels a little less like it's easy to get into character. You're in your pajamas. I mean, one time I was in my pajamas. um but it is like it feels like another element of the tapestry of creating the show. And the actors have done such an amazing job bringing life to what I just saw on the paper. And so I was just so excited to do it for a few of these wacky characters we wrote this season.
Definitely. And writing for a hamster, what is that like? Because he has his own personality and he's so much different than what I would have expected a hamster to be like on the show.
Well, we cast Beck Bennett into this character, and originally he was going to be more of like a Ferb in the sense that he would have very little lines and he was just sort of monosyllabic. But as Beck started, voicing Hamster, it just felt like Hamster evolved into a very complex character because of the actor. And so that's something that I always sort of well, I was shocked at in the moment, but I now always keep in mind, which is these characters like with casting and with writing, these characters change. And not only do they change in the sense like in the writer's room do they change, but all these other elements outside of the writer's room also create change in character. And I think being open to that change was what made Hamster such a remarkable character for last season. And then I think this season even more. So I have to give kudos to Beck Bennett for just being so hysterical in the booth and making us rethink what we had in mind for Hamster.
One of the interesting parts about this show in particular is how my nephews are picking up on a lot of these storylines that are like coming of age storylines or dealing with issue storylines. Is are these interjected with knowing that kids will pick it up, or is it just part of the story arc of a larger scale?
Well, obviously this show is for kids and adults, but it's for kids, but we like to treat kids the way we treat adults. I think they're really smart. I think they pick up on things. We don't need to mince it. We don't need to make it very simple for them to understand. They will pick it up. So I think we respect the intelligence of our audience no matter the age. So we're a little less maybe obvious in what our takeaways are than maybe some other shows. So I'm glad your nephews are picking up on it because we definitely have these coming of age and these lessons that we want people to learn, but we also don't want to make it too on the nose, right? Like we want to make it feel natural and like these characters would actually say the things that they're feeling and thinking.
For you, as we go along in the season two, what should we expect, and what do you hope people get out of this show?
Well, I think we'll see our characters be really challenged and they're going to be put in situations that are both shocking and very traumatic. Not in a terrible way, not in a terrible way, but in a way that it's like, oh my God, how are they going to get out of this? And I don't want to give any spoiler alerts, but I think they'll be okay. But they'll change and there's just going to be also a lot of challenges that you don't see coming. Um, and also just an insane amount of villains that you're like, this is the craziest villain I've ever heard of. So a lot of absurd. I think we really leaned into the absurd, both in humor but also in situations, and we really pushed our characters to an extreme.
That is awesome. I guess last question. Will we get to see crossovers in any of these episodes with Phineas and Ferb or Milo Murphy's Law?
There may or may not be a couple of Easter eggs. You will see. I can't give too much away, but just keep your eyes peeled, is what I'll say.
Awesome. Well, congratulations once again. This show is fantastic, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jesus.